Today's webinar is the last one in a series of learning opportunities and resources that have been provided by the Council on topics that actually contribute to the changing landscape of philanthropy and presenting new opportunities for the field to take a leadership role. And we've done this series in conjunction and collaboration with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, so we're thankful for their support with this. Today, I am your moderator for today's webinar. My name is Erica Plater-Turner. I'm Senior Director of Member Experience and Diversity Inclusion here at the Council on Foundations. I have the pleasure of welcoming you today. I have the pleasure of introducing our two presenters for today. And I thank you for choosing your time this afternoon with us. Before we actually begin, I just want to make sure that you are comfortable with the platform and with how things will proceed for today. And so on the slide that you have in front of you are just a little bit of housekeeping items for you to keep in mind. The first thing to know is that there is a help option in the toolbar at the top of your go-to navigation panel. If you need any help during the course of this webinar, you can click that help button and you will be assisted by a technology expert. We would love to hear from you today, your questions, your feedback throughout the different points of the webinar. And so there is an opportunity for you to send us your questions through the Q&A feature, and you'll see that icon on your platform where you can enter questions. And later into the webinar, we will ask you to either send us your questions or to raise your hand, and we will unmute your line and allow a conversation to begin. If you are using a telephone, we ask that you use a landline so that you have clarity in listening to the voices today, and that way you won't lose your signal with us. This webinar is actually going to be recorded, and it will be available on the Council website shortly after the conclusion of the webinar. The way that this will flow for today is we will take your top 2 or 3 burning questions immediately after our first presentation, and then we'll take the remainder of questions towards the end of the second presentation. And then we would like to have a group conversation with everyone to talk a little bit more about place-based philanthropy. So for today, I'd like to introduce to you your presenters. First up, we will have Lori Fuller. She is the Director of Evaluation and Research at the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust, which is based in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. They actually fund healthcare statewide and human services in Forsyth County to improve the quality of health for financially needy North Carolinians. Lori is going to share with us today ways in which the Kate B. Reynolds Foundation is changing the status quo with its place-based approaches to philanthropy. I think you'll find a lot of what Lori is going to share today very creative and innovative in how they think about place-based philanthropy in North Carolina. Our second presenter today is Sherry Brady, and she is Senior Associate for Strategic Partnerships at Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. And Sherry is going to share with us a lot of the learnings from the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions and the conversations they've been having with many organizations that are doing place-based philanthropy. So I welcome our presenters with us here today. Now, before I turn it over to Lori, we'd actually like to find out more about you and who you are that's joining us on the webinar today. So we do have a couple of polls, just 2, that we'd like to ask you. So we're going to go ahead and launch our first poll, and what I'd like to know is what role do you currently play in your organization? So that actual poll will be popping up on your screen right now, and if you could please take just a second and let us know the role that you play. And I'd apologize up front if your particular role is not listed here, but please choose one that's closest to what you do. We'll give you about 10 more seconds. Thank you so much for taking time to share with us the role that you're playing in your organization. In a few minutes, you will see what the outcomes of those numbers are, but it does look like from initial that we have about 55% of those who are joining us that are program staff, about 23% are CEOs, and about 13% or so are donor services staff, and then 8% are administrative staff in some capacity or another. And there's about 1% who are board members or trustees. So it's nice that we have We have a mix of individuals with us today, and we definitely have a lot of program staff, which is where a lot of this conversation will go. Our second poll that we'd like to ask is to really understand where you are right now in place-based giving. And so how involved are you in place-based philanthropy? And so that poll will now pop up on your screen. And if you could just take a second to answer the questions that are there for us so we can just get an understanding of how involved you are thus far. 10 more seconds. Thank you again. You're so quick. Thank you. It looks like we have about 50% of those who are with us on the webinar today are really heavily involved in place-based philanthropy. What that says to me is that I think we'll have some really rich and robust conversations. So as we hear not just from Lori and Sherry about what they're hearing and what Lori's doing at KB Reynolds, but I'd love to hear more from those of you who are heavily involved to share with all of your colleagues some of the work you're doing as well. So we'll get that opportunity later in the webinar. In addition to that 50%, it looks like 27% are just beginning to get involved. About 17% are thinking about it, and 6% of you have not gotten involved yet, which hopefully means that you're here to learn more about what's happening in the field on this subject so that we can get you involved in the future. So thank you very, very much. At this time, Lori, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you so you can dig in a little bit to what you've been doing at Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust. You there, Lori?
That's always the danger of muting yourself. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Erica.
You're welcome.
I'm going to start by talking about place-based work in general and then move into some of the specific work which Erica had addressed earlier. So first, let's look at some of the ways that place-based work can be structured. This thinking comes from Prue Brown. In some of the trust earlier work and thinking about what we would do, we went to an experienced leader in the field. This is a conceptualization of different types of place-based work that comes from Prue. We see from the list that place-based work has not just come from private foundations and community foundations, but it's also come from federal funders. We know that place-based work may be a single site or it can be multiple sites that may be connected to different degrees. One I want to highlight is the middle one, embedded funder targeting a single neighborhood. The trust where I work has two divisions. I'll talk later about the healthcare division, but the other division is focused locally on Forsyth County in which we're located. And although that work is bounded tightly by those county borders, that is, all of our grant making, all of our work is in Forsyth County. Even then, I do not consider it, at least historically, as having been place-based work. That's because until very recently, we haven't taken an approach that was an integrated way of coming at that work around a county-wide strategy. So although we're moving towards that, I just wanted to make the point that in my thinking that place-based work is more than just being connected to a certain place, that it involves more than that as well. On the next slide, I'm going to review some of the common characteristics, again from Prue, about place-based initiatives. Essentially, the idea here is that place-based work is multiple layered. It involves multiple partners. It has multiple approaches. And it's coordinated work. It's integrated or coordinated or collaborated over a long period of time, and that it's intentional, that we're going about this work with communities in very intentional ways, and that ultimately it's geared towards producing community change. So let's look now at the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust and what our story is. The trust journey really over at the last decade has really been a story about change. Our foundation has worked pretty deliberately and very intentionally on moving from grant making that was very charity oriented, was very much the kind of charitable banker model, towards grant making that is more oriented to change and results and impact. That's a journey that is still our current journey. It's one we're still on. But it began really when our new leadership came on board in 2005, when Karen McNeil-Miller joined the trust as our president. Before that, we had, in many ways, perfected. We had become very good at being effective at funding good people doing good work. But beyond that impact, we were uncertain about our impact in the community and the change that we were making. So one of our first steps was to become more targeted and focused. Instead of funding everything in healthcare in North Carolina for low-income folks, we became more targeted on what eventually became our 4 issue areas. So those 4 still are, 1, access to primary care, and 2 is diabetes. The 3rd one is mental health and substance abuse, and the 4th one is community-centered prevention. So that's some background on our story early on and what set us up in the context to move to place-based work. So now we'll look at those steps that really helped us come into that place and put Healthy Places NC in context. There was more change in our trust leadership that really paved the way for the next round of changes in our grant making. In 2011, Alan Smart was promoted to be the director of the healthcare division. And Karen at that point tasked him with developing what she would call one big thing. That one big thing would really grow to represent half of our payout. So it would represent a large part of our work. That step would definitely take us, was intended to take us, and has taken us to a bigger, bolder way of grant making. It's also to push us to come closer to our ultimate goal, that being to have a positive impact over the long term on the quality of health of low-income North Carolinians. There were a couple pieces that started to come together in the early thinking. Alan knew he wanted to build something around rural counties, which in North Carolina are home to over 2 million people. Rural counties also represent the majority of our state. At least 60 of our 100 counties are rural, depending on which definition you use. We also came to know that we wanted it to be place-based. Again, not just that it would be focused on a specific geographic area, but it would be that, and it would involve community members in setting priorities and making decisions. So this work would be long-term, and it would be community-driven, and it would be really deeply embedded in these rural counties. So that's how Healthy Places NC was born. Healthy Places NC is the Trust's decade-long initiative to invest at least $100 million in about a dozen financially disadvantaged rural counties. On the map, you'll see that the 40 counties here that are marked in blue are designated as Tier 1 counties. For us, this is the designation from the North Carolina Department of Commerce for the most economically distressed counties in the state. And many, if not all of them, are rural counties. So Healthy Places NC has begun to focus on some of these counties, and then will grow out to more, but they will all be Tier 1, that is economically distressed counties in our state. Since the initiative began, about 2 years ago in 2012, we've invited 4 counties to participate. They are Beaufort, Halifax, McDowell, and Rockingham. You'll see in the circles here. We will now plan to continue to add 1 or 2 counties a year until we've reached about a dozen counties. So this is the kind of the literal map of what Healthy Places is, but I want to take us back because as we started planning Healthy Places NC several years ago, we truly wanted to learn from the field and the experience of other funders. So we looked at lessons learned from other grant makers. We knew that we wanted to design something that is, or at least has been known in philanthropy as a comprehensive community initiative, or a CCI. But we also wanted to avoid the common pitfalls that had been experienced by other funders doing similar efforts. We knew that, and then continued to learn that, many funders doing this intensive place-based work have chosen a lead organization in the community, possibly created a coalition or a task force around that or involving that lead organization, have begun the initiative with a formal planning process, and have in some cases come in with a clear model, kind of fully baked from the beginning, of what the step-by-step process would be for the communities involved in the initiative. When we looked at results, we began seeing that coalitions had seldom been successful, at least in the area of changing the health of the entire community, and that's really what was driving us. We also knew that in rural communities, there would be even fewer established nonprofit organizations to join an effort such as a coalition that in most cases is organization-based, that somebody's coming to that coalition representing their organization. So we knew we would have fewer, a less robust nonprofit infrastructure from which to pick. We also knew and learned from others that picking the wrong lead organization, we could inadvertently create somebody who was a gatekeeper, a power broker between the community and the foundation. We also knew that it would be all too easy to choose the wrong lead organization up front, especially in the communities that we didn't know as well or as deeply. So instead of going that direction, we tried to turn and really have gone in a different direction by encouraging an approach to community change which is both decentralized and as emergent as we continue to go. So we're doing that rather than expecting a community-wide planning group to figure everything out on the front end. In this way, as we've been about the work and led that initial work by how much change we all working together could produce, rather than leading with, we're the foundation and here is the amount of money, here's how much money we're bringing to the table or to your county. We're leading with how much change, and we're also involving a broad range of folks across different sectors. And it's our hope that in doing that, not only are we building something different, which seems apparent at this point in the process, but hopefully will also be sustainable. So that leads us to the strategy that we've chosen in Healthy Places NC. We've chosen a strategy that's iterative and emerging. We want to be able to learn as we go and adapt the work accordingly because we knew we didn't have all the answers, and we definitely didn't have all the answers at the beginning. Healthy Places NC is designed to spark local people to do several things differently. We're hoping that they'll take more initiative, that they'll work together in ways that go against convention and the way things have always been done in that county, and to learn from their experience. By doing this, those shifts in community attitudes and increasing their capacity, both through that work and other supports from the trust, the idea is that will be what will yield long-term benefits. So if we're successful, residents will increase their capacity to better identify and then solve their health problems, and then they'll also be better able to design and implement the things that are needed to advance community health in that place. We hope by setting in motion this new thinking and behaviors that it will, in essence, help to change the culture and make the culture in that community more health promoting. So that's a part of what we want to see change in the mindset of the community, that one, change can happen in many of these places. Positive change has not happened in many ways for a long time. So it's changing the mindset that change can happen, and not only that, but that local residents can be a part of it. Our theory around grant making is really that the idea of grants, because we are bringing money to the table, even though we're not leading with that piece of the program, but that the prospect of grants will help stimulate local folks to take initiative and partner in different and new ways. Our early grants are taking advantage of that, and they're also our way of supporting the community's first approximation of what a solution might be. We're not expecting them to nail it out of the box, and that it will continue to be tweaked, and some of these early grants won't continue to build. But some of them, the ones that are successful, will actually serve as the starting point for developing the long-term strategy in that community. So they're also acting at the same time that they're planning. In addition, the part of the strategy for Healthy Places, which is different from other approaches that we've done in the past in our grant making, our initiatives historically, we've consciously built in ways to support both the community in doing this different type of work, but we've also built in ways to support ourselves at the foundation for doing this type of work. One of the supports we've brought to the mix in the communities is a partnership with community health rankings and roadmaps. They have come in to support the counties in reviewing and using the data about their own county around health outcomes. Another critical support that we have engaged with in helping the foundation itself change the way we do our work is the National Implementation Research Network. They're known as NERN. The folks from NERN have become embedded in our foundation team, and they have worked every month with the program officers, both as a group and individually. So this has been going on for about 2 years and will continue to go on as we continue to build out and support our program officers in doing this work. So the folks from NERN have been working with the program officers to both build the concept of what this work was, because we were not clear and we didn't have it fully conceptualized at the beginning. So to build the concept for this work and at the same time coach the program officers towards the very competencies that they need to do that new work well. It's really not a surprise when we changed the way we wanted communities to work with us that we also had to flip that, and we had to change the way we worked with communities. And then given that, obviously one of the critical changes has been changing the role of the program officers as the people that often have the most interaction as a foundation representative with that community. So we have moved from our historical role of a program officer at the trust. The primary function was to bring in projects that were fundable. The demands of this new role, which we will often call the program officer of the 21st century, to really kind of reflect this kind of modernization and a new way of looking at this position. This new role means that the program officers have to use an entirely different approach than what they did previously. Healthy Places North Carolina work requires not only behaving differently but thinking differently. We're asking ourselves, instead of how do we make programs successful or how do we make organizations robust and effective, we are also asking ourselves, and maybe primarily asking ourselves, how do we help make families successful? So the program officers are now spending a great deal more time in the counties. And when they're in those counties, they're doing different work. They're connecting people across sectors, and they're cultivating ideas to improve community health, whether or not those may come in as future grant applications. While they're doing this, they are having to carefully question what's the underpinnings of the poor health in those communities, while at the same time listening to folks who in the past have really been outside of not only our lens for investment, but also the lens of who we would think we would talk to. They've not been in our group of usual suspects. So those people that we're now talking to, the program officers are now engaging, might include educators or county officials. They might be community activists or private employees. And those are really new folks for us to be talking to in communities. So the switch is really quite profound. We're asking the program officers to change from the person with the checkbook and being seen as the person with that checkbook to someone who is both professionally and personally dedicated to best using the influence of the trust to help affect long-term change. So the program officer role has changed, but we're also learning and adapting our work as we go, as we're in 2 years into this long-term initiative. One of the places we're stepping up our efforts is in evaluation to support that learning, to help us to keep adapting. We've been involved in developmental evaluation with a team from Duke University, and we'll continue to build out the evaluation to match different phases of our work. We're also increasing our communications and outreach to ensure that residents in these rural areas understand what Healthy Places is, or even more important, even if they don't know the phrase Healthy Places NC, and definitely if they don't know Cape Breton Charitable Trust, that's okay, but do they know how they can engage in the work as it evolves and grows and help play a part in the change in their community? The place we're at now, a couple of years in, we've added our 4th county after starting with 4 counties, and we'll continue to deliberately and intentionally add counties and build out over time, but that also means that the program officers are exploring what it means to work effectively with more than one county at the same time, while at the same time juggling other pieces of the work, because Healthy Places NC does not represent 100% of who we are and what we're doing. We're also at the very beginning start of a new phase, which we've been crafting and working to build out of the support that would be needed on the ground in those communities as the program officers have a less intensive time commitment in those counties as more counties are added to their portfolio. So we are starting to implement what we're calling regional support organizations. This is a new type of partner that will provide support to those counties. They'll be the program and the strategy support team for counties once the program officers move on, are still involved in, but move on to more intensive work with new counties. So all of that is a quick picture to paint of a very complicated picture of our work in Healthy Places NC. And as we look back, I can tell and see and feel and have really experienced that we've come a long way. What seemed impossible 7 or 8 years ago has now truly become the framework for our day-to-day work. We've made progress, and that progress often has not been easy. The progress has often not been steady. There have been ups and downs and starts and stops. But the changes that we have made truly underscore our organization's values. So the changes have really become a part of who we are at the Trust. And I think most importantly, these changes, as difficult as they've been at times and as ongoing as they are, they've really helped us do work that has the potential to have a greater impact. So I'll end my piece by saying that this work is never done, that this is a journey that is never complete. But it is very exciting. It engages myself and my colleagues, and we're seeing signs that it's engaging folks in the communities in a way that is different, and that is exciting, especially having done this work for a while, to see something that is not just said is different, but it really feels different and is playing out that way too. And I think the thing that is the most exciting for me is that it's just full of potential in a way that historically the approach we were taking is not. So it's been a lot of fun and very challenging. I look very much forward to the questions and discussion later. And thank you to the Council on Foundations for letting me share some of our journey at the Trust with you all.
Well, thank you so much, Lori. I think it's a great story that you're sharing of the work that's happening with Kate B. Reynolds. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience to see if you have any questions. And if you do, please raise your hand, which is to click the hand button on your screen, on the far right screen. And once it's lit up, we will unmute your line and ask you to announce yourself. And while we're kind of waiting on some of those questions to come in, Lori, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
Taking on this kind of approach to community change, and that's, like as you said, decentralized, it's emergent, it's thinking differently about the role of program officers. Can you tell me a little bit about the reaction and the support and thinking of your board as you've made this change?
Yes, obviously that's an important question, and it's one that the Trust is in a rather unique situation because our governance structure is not typical of much of the world of philanthropy nor private foundations. Because we are a trust in the way that we were established, instead of a board of trustees, we have a single trustee, which is a corporate entity that is Wells Fargo. So it certainly involved and continues to involve that relationship and communication with the trustee as to what we were planning and wanting to do, and revisiting that to talk about, even though this looks different, this is playing out the way we had hoped, or this is what we're seeing, even though the signs of success, especially early on, aren't going to be the same signs as you would see from our more historical responsive portfolio of grant making. So it's taken a lot of communications, but we did have more of a single entity to partner with in doing this, and having done this work in many ways the same way for 60 years, the trustee was also asking, what is our impact and why are we continuing to fund the same people doing the same things? They were also in ways ready to move on to something else. But it's been an ongoing piece as we have moved on to something else to remind them of why we're doing it, to bring them along, and to make sure we do have some early wins, whether it's a Kaboom playground or something else that people can concretely touch and say, oh, something's happening.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that answer. We actually do have a hand raised, and so we're going to ask Carla Roberts. We're going to unmute your line and ask you to please go ahead and ask your question of Lori. Carla, can you hear us? You should be unmuted. Okay, it seems like we can't actually hear Carla right now. We've unmuted her line. While we're waiting, either Carla, if you could send me your question via the question box, or if you can, we'll try to come back to you again. I do have a question that has come in through the Q&A function, and one of the questions, Laurie, is what different skills did your program officers need to build or acquire, and how did they go about building those new skills given their new roles, in addition to any actual coaching that happened?
You know, that has been a core component of this work and the work for the program officers, because first we had to decide what the work was, and then they were already practicing doing it, and so simultaneously we're figuring out what those competencies are, what those skills are. Many of them are things that could be powerful and helpful to a program officer in almost any role, not necessarily this role of Healthy Places NC, but it involved assessing power and privilege in these communities, in these conversations, and being able to assess not just what's being said, but what it could mean, and when you're hearing different things from different people, to go a different level below just reporting what somebody said, but also to process it. The skills to start building a kind of comprehensive multi-piece strategy that's connected. I know one of the things that our evaluators are working on is a social network analysis of people in the communities. In many ways, the program officers are building their own social networks in those communities and outside with partners. So those types of pieces are just some of the skills that program officers needed. You know, even though I know you asked beyond coaching, coaching has been critical, and the coaching has been has been a very active way to help build those skills, because that coaching has been about real life examples that are happening on the ground, and again, sometimes it's with the group of program officers sharing with each other and learning from each other of what phase of the work am I in, how do I know, what would I be seeing if we're moving to a deeper or later phase with this organization or this strategy in the community. So a lot of it has been practicing and continuing to build and refine and scope out what the expectations are. Obviously, if you can put out the expectations, people are better able to meet it. And then providing those coaching and that practice and the reinforcement of being consistent with those expectations has helped as well. And everybody's different, so in many ways, in some ways you're asking program officers to become community organizers, but from a foundation perspective, and some folks bring in skills with that apply and go across really easily, and some are creating or adapting skills that they've got from other places.
Okay. We have actually, Carla has sent us in her question, and her question is if you could give a little more information on the regional support organizations that you had mentioned that you're creating to help with the community outreach.
In many ways, I wish I could. It is such a new concept that it actually isn't on the ground yet. Our thought is that we would fund, a couple of organizations in the state that would each serve multiple counties that are healthy places in city counties, and would be able to assist and extend and play a role in the community in some ways like the program officer, but in other ways it's completely unique and new because because these regional support organizations and the people that will work for them or in that regional support program, it may be a part of an existing organization. The people that are running this regional support team will be in many ways more tied to and accountable to and in service to the community than the program officers who are more tied and accountable and in service to the foundation than they are to the community. So in some ways that balance will shift, and our hope is definitely to build a seamless piece and transition so that the program officer is still involved, but there is, as the community needs it, more support to follow up on, ask questions, figure out what technical assistance is needed, bring folks in to help meet those needs, and coordinate some of the pieces that are going on in the county. Definitely more to come on that. That is again, it's a very new concept. We are currently working on the process of initiating those and starting those. So more to come.
So I actually would, and I know Laura, you were open to this, so I would actually suggest that Carla and anyone else who's interested in learning more about that regional support organization model, please stay in touch with Lori as things continue to be built out and come to fruition, and as they continue to learn more from that. And we will be sure to provide their Lori and Sherry's email addresses to you at the end of the webinar, so you can have that information.
To Carla's question, I think it was Carla's about the program officers. Maybe I'm mixing them up. Okay. The program officer piece, anyone who's interested in more details on that, NERN has helped us develop a program officer profile which very clearly articulates those competencies and skills that program officers need to do different phases of this work. So that document alone can go into much greater detail than I did in my answer as to what program officers need to be able to do this.
Is that a document you're able to share that we could send out to attendees?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Great. I have another question for you. It's a kind of a follow-up question to the one I asked about your board's kind of reaction, and it's to help us understand a little bit more about any of the legal ramifications of a private foundation changing its funding strategies, if any. Were there any challenges that the foundation went through as you went to more of this kind of place-based model and how you're funding the different counties than previously?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
You know, that primarily the considerations, because of course we're always going to stay within the bounds of what is legal for the private foundations, that wasn't a kind of top of the mind consideration as we shifted. One of the areas that had been coming up for us already and definitely increased as we moved into healthy places was the potential mechanisms for funding smaller grassroots organizations, which are more likely to be in those, or are not necessarily that they're more likely to be there, but they're more likely the folks that we would be working with in these rural counties with less established nonprofit infrastructures with longer tenure and larger budgets. So in potentially working with smaller and or younger grassroots organizations, the trustee has certainly raised the issue of tipping with us, of that if we make large grants to some of these organizations, we could potentially jeopardize their tax status. So we've been very deliberate about that and explored different ways to do that, including some work with local community foundations to make sure that we don't cause any legal difficulties for anybody, but still get the work that the trustee does support us to do done in those communities. I would say as well, I think the shift, not legal, but more technical, has been that we're now more often funding truly collaborative pieces, but yet our grant procedure is designed for one organization to come forward and get the grant. So we're having to learn how to be more flexible in when that one organization is truly representing a partnership, and what that means not just for the application, but for the management of the grant through its life cycle.
Great, thank you, Lori. The last question I have is, what other types of research did the Foundation conduct outside of using National Implementation Research Network to determine the needs of the community?
Great question. So we had been funding in many, if not all, of these communities for decades, and around, deepening areas as we started to focus. So part of it was our own experience and what we had learned, especially in our areas of focus, like diabetes statewide. And so we knew some of the state pieces that were coming into play across the state at state levels and in these rural counties around diabetes. So we had a sense around, especially those issue areas, of what was happening and what the needs were and what could work and what really wasn't feasible or wasn't effective. We have also brought into play the data from the folks at rankings and roadmaps to come in and bring some of that national data, which is county specific, to give us a sense of where folks are, both on how sick folks are and on how folks are dying and what they're dying from, and really expanding health care beyond that. Those are affected by more than just medical care. So we've brought national partners in like NERN, and then we've also brought in other technical assistance pieces and partners who are working with folks in the community to figure out what their needs are, because we weren't saying these are the needs or what we're going to fund or what the strategy is up front. We weren't having to do a formal standard needs assessment up front, because we are continuing to learn what the needs in those communities are, and the residents are telling us through different vehicles and venues as we go forward. So we haven't locked in stone that we're going to do issue X in this county based on we believe this is the need. That's a piece where the emergent piece really helps us play that out in a different way.
Okay.
We did also, I will say, in choosing the counties, we looked at county data compared to peer counties, not even just in the state of North Carolina, but other similar counties with similar rurality, similar demographics, and looked for some counties in North Carolina that something positive seemed to be going on, because some of their countywide health statistics were actually better than you would expect for other peer counties.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lori, for your presentation. Thank you for answering the questions that have come through thus far. At this point, we're going to turn it over to Sherry from the Aspen Institute. And Sherry, if you could take the wheel, it's all yours. So share a little bit more about what you're learning.
Hi, thank you. And thanks, Lori. That was actually great, and it really was an example of a lot of things that we learned at our meeting. Let me give you a little bit of background on the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, and then go from there. We grew out of the White House Council for Community Solutions that was put in place by President Obama in 2010 to really look at ways to approach some sort of consistent and entrenched problems in communities, and how communities could be involved in solving those. And two of the things that came out of it were really that one population that would be really good to look at would be opportunity youth, which are youth from 16 to 24 who are not connected to education or work. And the other was that the collective impact approach was a really solid approach that we could be using to help communities to solve community problems, and also to help identify community problems. So one of the things that was first launched by the Forum for Community Solutions was a funder collaborative, the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, where we fund 21 communities using the collective impact approach to work on building pathways to education and employment for youth for 16 to 24 who are not connected to, like I said, we're not connected to work or education. And it's actually this group, the Funder Collaborative, that got us thinking about place-based philanthropy and what that means for the field and for movement building and for community change, and how a different way for philanthropy to engage in funding would be beneficial for community solutions. And that came at our grantee convening in November of 2013 in Aspen, where we had the funders who were involved in funding the 21 communities, funders across the board, local, regional, and national, had a conversation about how you work together in these kind of funded collaborative opportunities in place to do this kind of collective impact work and work with opportunity youth. And it really surfaced a lot of tensions and concerns from both the local funders and the national funders. And it really was concerns about trust, concerns about national funders swooping in with an agenda already set in place and not knowing the landscape and not knowing what was already happening or being respectful of that. And it really signaled to us that there needs to be a larger field-wide conversation about this. So this led to us partnering with the Neighborhood Funders Group to hold a convening earlier this month. It was just, can't believe it's just 2 weeks ago, so I'm still catching up on my sleep as a result of that. But to explore the tensions and talk about what we need to think about as what are some of the best practices in place-based philanthropy, and what are some of the guardrails, do's and don'ts, and guidelines to be thinking about when investing in place. And this conversation was really, the idea behind this conversation was for it to be a beginning conversation with, again, a broad range of foundations. We had local, regional, and national foundations, as well as some corporate foundations, really having some open and honest conversations about what their tensions were and what their concerns were as they're either thinking about going into place-based philanthropy or as they're working in place and what this means. So really I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the themes and lessons that we've learned from that, and then think some of the future work that we're going to be working on as we look at this issue. Really, and the definition and the real big thing that came out of the meeting was that place-based philanthropy should really be about enabling and expecting community residents to participate in determining their own destiny. There was really a concern about talking about places being place-based philanthropy as making sure that there was active community engagement and community participation, and really moving from just community engaged to a community-led approach to where communities are co-creating with the foundations and not just problem solving but in problem identification. In some of the foundational practice themes that came out of the meeting that we got from both the pre-conference survey that we did, that we're going to be putting that information out as soon as we finish doing some more looking at some of the responses that we've gotten in, is really that national local funders need to coordinate their asks of community. One of the big concerns has been really with this new look at place-based philanthropy, since it's become so popular, is that a lot of community organizations and communities are feeling pulled in many different directions from their funding partners. It's that foundations come in and they're each have different goals and even different processes in which you can apply for grants or get grants, different reporting requirements. You've got different evaluation questions, and thinking about the capacity of the organizations that you're working with to respond to all those needs. So how do foundations think about coordinating with the potential partners on the ground and even other national funders who are partnering in place? And so really, I'm thinking about nationals engaging local funders before launching particular initiatives in communities, and local funders working to educate national funders on the context of the communities in which they're coming into. Because really the local funders are often the people who have that knowledge because they're a part of the community on the ground. Another concern that came up and theme that came up was that funders need to think about place-based work as long-term and get away from the initiative mentality of 3 to 5. And some would even say just the idea of going in with an initiative mentality and having a start and stopping place can sometimes have a freezing effect on the way that some of the place-based work can be done. And one of the questions that was asked when we were talking about this was, do you go in with already with an exit strategy and thinking about sustainability? And one of our speakers was like, well, you don't go into a marriage thinking about your exit strategy. But whether or not this is a marriage or not is probably one of the questions that can really come up. But really getting away from this thing of thinking about it being an initiative and thinking about, okay, if we go in with 100 or we go in with 10 particular organizations that we're working with, and then as the initiative comes to a close, we start dropping organizations as we go into that, and removing that as one of the foundational practices and approaches to initiatives when you're doing a place-based work. And one of the things that was highlighted by Lori was really thinking about the skill sets that program officers need to do place-based work. In this work, we're often asking them to do different things than just than you do in normal grant making. And part of it is community organizing. Part of it is being the connector and the convener in the community with different organizations. What are the skill sets that we want program officers to have as they're on the ground? What does their knowledge of the place need to be? And so that was coming up. Letting go of a funder ego, knowing when to sit back and listen to the community and to your partners, and not always thinking that you have the only agenda or the best agenda or the smartest organization in the room. Acknowledgement and understanding of the context of the place in which you're investing. This includes the race and class dynamics that exist in place. Each place is different. They have lots of different politics and contexts that are going on the ground, and understanding that. And the big one was really sticking with it even when times are tough, and that was part of that was the talking about dropping groups that aren't necessarily performing in the way that you want them to do. Do you want to help them build their capacity to be able to perform better, or are you just looking for good numbers? Excuse me. The next big things that we talked about was really the relationships, and how relationships were key in the place-based work. Next slide, please. So a key factor for the relationship needs was really taking the time to build trust with the community and with your partners, recognize and acknowledge that there is a power differential between the funders who are bringing the big dollars and the community, and understanding that in the past, while in some cases you've had a long relationship with these groups, and you're trying to have a different kind of relationship with the groups, that it's going to take a while to get that trust, because there's been because of this power dynamic and understanding that the communities are not used to necessarily dealing with foundations in this way of open honesty and trust, because that in the past has often led to them not being funded anymore if the funder doesn't think that they're performing up to the goals of the foundation. So thinking about that. I'm going with the spirit of co-creation. I listen to the communities, including local funders. Try to align goals with local priorities. Understand what's important to the community, and how do these goals align, so you're not just dropping in a new set of goals that aren't really what the organization or what the community needs, because you've read some statistics and think that you have the answer to this, to what they need. Again, this goes to the trust piece. Be transparent with your partners. Also, be flexible and be willing to think about what your definition of success is, and how, and when it's time to sort of look at the strategy that you're using, and if it's not working, think about being willing to change, being willing to listen to your grantees when they say this won't work in our community, and this is why it won't work in our community, even if it's worked in other places, and how do we go from that point. So those were some of the key things that came out of the meeting that we just had. And I will say, this is the beginning, we're new to this. This was really, for us at the Aspen Forum, we're not trying to invent anything new. We know that a lot of people are working on this. We're really trying to figure out how we can help document and get this information out into the field, to move the field of practice into a way that has a better impact on communities and can help build civic infrastructure, and community capacity to be able to engage in community change in the most effective way for communities. So really, I'm here to learn from the people on this call who have been doing this work, from people like Lori who have been doing this work. A couple of the pieces that we have developed so far for this meeting were the video of the funder conversation that led to this, which I think raises a lot of issues and could be of interest to some people on the call, and there's the link to that. There's also we curated NFG in partnership with us, and the Movement Strategy Center curated a resource list for the meeting that has a large number of resources around different elements of place-based philanthropy. And I forgot to include that link, and I apologize for that, but I've sent it to Storm so that she can send it out when she sends out the follow-up materials for this. We are also planning to write proceedings from this. As I said, the meeting just happened 2 weeks ago from the meeting, and we'll have some more programming around this and some clearinghouse abilities to be gathering all the research and the stories that are being told and case studies of the work that's being done, so that we can help build this kind of information for the field. And I'm glad to share that when we get that information up and ready. So those are just some of the key things that we've learned. And I think Lori's example was sort of a good specific example of some of the lessons that people are learning and talking about from this kind of work. But I'm glad to answer more questions either about the convening or about the other work that we're doing on this.
Thank you so much, Sherry, for your presentation. At this time, we will open it up to questions from the audience once again. And so if you're attached to a telephone or if you have a microphone on your computer, you are welcome to raise your hand in the platform, and we will unmute your line so that you can ask your question of Sherry. In addition, you can email, you can send your question to us through the Q&A function on the platform as well. And then once we have questions for Sherry answered, we love to move into just a full group conversation, because as we remember, we had a little over half of those with us who have been involved with place-based philanthropy for a little while, so we love to get additional perspectives and different additional approaches shared on the call today. So any questions for Sherry? Right now I don't see any, Sherry. If not, we will we will open it up to have a full group conversation. I actually would love to hear from everyone that's here on the call, including you, Lori, and you, Sherry, an understanding of when you think about place-based philanthropy and using this approach in a lot of your work, where do the main obstacles lie? Is it internal to the foundation? Is it external to the communities in which you're working with and serving? And what do those obstacles look like? And what do you think, and what do you even hear from your colleagues who are doing this work as far as obstacles and challenges that we face?
I can just speak a little bit to that.
Okay.
This is Sherry. I think it's a mix. I think one part of it really is sort of this idea of, in some cases, it's convincing your board. The question that you asked of Lori was one of the ones that I actually wanted to ask her myself, was what role the trustees played in, or in her case, the trustee played in thinking about changing the way that the foundation approaches its work. It's a new thought in some cases for philanthropy, and thinking about going into a place in depth for a long period of time. We're used to the work that we do in philanthropy being cyclical, and this is asking for a real change in mindset. So I think that's part of one of the obstacles is, how do you think about success in a different way? How do you show progress in a way that's not just how many kids got shots today, but it's sort of a long-term building capacity and building infrastructure, and it's a real mind shift of foundational practices.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. You know, I actually have a couple other questions as we are waiting for others to pipe in with their answers and questions. When we think about how this work is happening, there's a lot of different ways to go about place-based philanthropy, and I'm just curious, especially in your position, Lori, and in what you're hearing, Sherry, like how are you documenting the learnings? How are you going to document kind of those nuances that make this type of approach different from kind of the traditional comprehensive community initiatives that we may be used to? And are you thinking about additional ways to share what you're learning with your colleagues in the broader field of philanthropy?
This is Lori. You know, we have tried to be intentional and have had to remind ourselves throughout the time, because the work is so engaging and time-consuming and takes so much careful thought. But we have multiple partners that are documenting this in different ways. So we have the developmental evaluation folks at Duke who are talking to key informants in the counties at different times about different things and getting their perspective. We are documenting some things throughout our monthly strategy meetings, where we have a half day once a month to meet together as a team as we continue to design and do this work. We have gotten to the place now where we actually have several documents, including the program officer profile, that we have shared and talked about in conferences as well, and we will continue to do that as we learn about different parts of this work. We've also done some essays distributed through Grantmakers and Help and other places, trying to think about which audiences, what messages would be the most beneficial to them. But at the same time, I would say that we have kind of grossly under-resourced ourselves in communications on this, and are constantly trying to do the very best we can and increase those resources to get the word out, one, just to the communities, but beyond that, to the field of philanthropy.
Thank you, Lori. Another question for you is, which foundations would you consider to be leaders in place-based philanthropy? So where do you, Lori and Sherry, where do you look for your peer learning and for your best practices as your work progresses?
You know, ironically for us, it's a foundation that is, you know, literally a mile down the road. And even though it has Reynolds and the name is not related to us, the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation, in many ways, in their work to eliminate poverty in places across the Southeast as a region, have been early adopters of a type of model even before I think we were calling it place-based. And in many ways, our new roles for the program officers resemble what they now call, instead of program officers, network officers, and the work that they've been doing for quite a while, way before us, in the way that you interact and listen to and work with communities.
I would agree. I think that the work that they're doing at Mary Reynolds Babcock is great. Gladys Washington was actually at the meeting, and just wonderful examples. Another, I would say, the California Endowment is doing some really great work. And it's really, I don't think that Jim Ketty would call the work that they're doing really place-based. It's just sort of an integrated approach to doing it. But they're doing some really great work, and I'm really thinking of different ways to approach this kind of work and partnering with community and getting community engagement, community results. The General Services Administration Foundation, General Services Foundation in Colorado has also got a great initiative in Denver that their approach has been really integrated and done very well. So those are just two that are coming to mind right now.
Thank you both for those answers. Sherry, for you in particular, I have a question. First, they thank you very much for your presentation, and the relationship thing seemed critical to the success of place-based giving, so they appreciate you highlighting those. It takes humility that many foundations and government programs still need to cultivate. But from the donor-advised funds to design of outcome metrics, it takes a lot of the humility to do that. So what first steps do you recommend to help foundations develop more comfort around these softer type of roles?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we're planning to explore. But it's sort of going into a place, being willing, I think, to go into a place
Okay, thank you. Another question I have is, do you have either of you have particular suggestions or advice for funders who want to engage in place-based philanthropy outside of their home bases? And then what unique challenges are to be expected that might be different from those that embedded funders face?
You know, that piece we have lived out, even though we're funding across the state and have been to be in place in a county that's a 6-hour drive away, and there's other types of transportation don't make any sense. Does take a different level of organization, and it changes how our internal structure needs to be set up to support program officers who are on the road more often in ways and places that don't necessarily have strong cell phone coverage or internet access. So we've had to think about that piece. We've also been very cautious before sending partners into those communities and have done kind of very careful, thoughtful screenings of that potential partner's culture and how they may be perceived in that community. One of those areas that we've done that around is would this partner be able to come into a rural community in a way that feels respectful and like they get it, in a way that would engage positively and not be those city folks from Raleigh, or even in some cases, oh my goodness, somebody outside of North Carolina, how would they possibly know who we are? So often we've looked for folks that very specifically have experience in rural communities, and then have, because the program officers very slowly and over a long time built up trust with those communities, are often the ones serving as the introductions and connectors to build those relationships in a way that is respectful and more palatable. We knew, you know, when the program officers were in these communities more often for quite a while, I mean 6 months to a year before we invited those communities to become a part of this. So it wasn't, we also didn't drop in and say, okay, we're here. You know, our travel budget has gone up tremendously because how often the program officers are on the road, and they're there so often. I knew we had gotten into one county when the program officer showed up at the hotel, and the person behind the desk said, oh, honey, Miss So-and-so is here, get a room ready. And they knew she was there and a part of things. So it takes time, and it takes building trust, and you really, I don't think you can be too kind of conscious and deliberate about making sure partners work, including yourself as a partner, in a place where you're not from and you're not going to be there when things go wrong, and you haven't been there and seen everybody else come in and not leave with much success and actually leave some bitter taste in people's mouths.
A great comment, Lori. I think we have another question. We have a hand raised. So, Daria, we are going to unmute your line so that you can ask the question.
Hi, this is Dara. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Hi, I actually have a question for Lori. I was wondering, with this new way that you're asking your program officers to work at your foundation, quite a sharp difference and very interesting. What kind of reaction did your program officers have? Did they embrace this new way of working? Did they love the change? Was there any pushback or fear? I'd love to learn a little bit more about that.
Yes to all of those. It was absolutely everything you named, and probably all the others you could continue to think about. I think there was in some ways both the pushback and especially early on, what are you talking about? Explain to us what this looks like. And, you know, leadership kind of had this idea and vision and felt like they knew how to do it, but there was sometimes a disconnect between explaining and really making that concept real on the ground. So I think one piece that helped alleviate and that pushback and prevent other future pushback was that the program officers were engaged, you know, on that strategy team as we started this, they have been a part of creating what it is. So even though it's had to meet with kind of within the ideas of leadership, they have been a critical part in building it out. And they've also been one of the key voices that has kind of brought back the community to us. So they have been engaged. You know, yes, some folks have absolutely loved it. I think there are people at foundations all over that in their own ways are serving this role and approach this work in this way, and so that this wouldn't be foreign to them, and that there are fabulous program officers everywhere that are doing this work to the best they can within their context. So you know, different people, you know, sometimes somebody with a social work background can come in and get pieces like, oh, this is the way I want to work, this is great. You know, there were folks that everybody has been at a different pace, and I think as well, everybody in the organization has been going through their own changes at the same time. So it's been it's definitely been a group process, but absolutely we have had, you know, every reaction that you manage and communicate and do all those things that help it be as smooth as possible. But it has been for everybody in the organization as a whole, not just the program officers. You know, a very robust change. So it has been a long-term process that continues.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Daria, and thank you, Lori, for that answer. We have probably time. I have about 2 or 3 more questions, and then we will start to wrap up the webinar. But before we do, this first question is, when you look at the outcomes and measurable goals that dealing with place-based work, how do you decide on these, especially given multiple factors that contribute to change?
I was thinking earlier when, Erica, you mentioned about, you know, kind of these more soft approaches. Yeah. I don't think we would have ever done these soft approaches without the idea that we were only doing them in order to receive harder, bigger impact and outcomes beyond having served 100 people or 1,000 people get primary care, that we were trying to, if we didn't want to affect that kind of large-scale community change of improving the health across a county, there's no reason to do this work, because it's very hard and very difficult, and you can get different levels of results with work that is a great deal less stressful and difficult. So we've also, you also have to, so ultimately for the trust, I think it's that whatever goals, whatever measures and indicators we see early on, we absolutely have to tie them into our best educated guess that we believe that those will lead to the true larger countywide health improvement changes we want to see in the future. Knowing that those are in the future, but that we're not interested in how many grants we make unless it's the type of grants that we believe will build to those types of changes, as one example. That all the means that we're doing now are to the ends that need to be tied to the ends of countywide impact, and knowing absolutely that we are not the only player or the only thing affecting those. And so that's part of our strategy, is actually catalyze some of those other people and resources and partners and policies that would help shift things that are much more indirect. So currently what we are measuring early on are things like those early changes in mindset and activation of folks in the community, and belief that something can happen or that they're working in different ways, because we believe that those are the first steps to the ultimate change that we and those counties want to see.
And I also, just from our perspective, I also think there's a want to leave behind some sort of civic infrastructure that communities have in place to be able to engage in community solutions, just sort of long term, that when these initiatives or this cycles or whatever you might call them are over, that there is an infrastructure in place for community to be able to deal with problems as they arise in a way that's efficient and most effective for the communities. And it's not just about, as Laura was saying, people got healthcare services. Well, that's an important piece of it, but there's something left behind. That's an infrastructure and a way for community to continue to act.
Thank you both for your answers to that question. My next question is, do you know of a foundation that's using its grant funding to supplement a failing city's government functions, such as sanitation, park renovation, or grant writing for the city? The first one, of course, that I think of is Detroit. And I know a lot of the foundations in Detroit, especially like Aspen and others, are there's been lots of conversations and sharing about what they're doing there to help the city as its financial infrastructure has been crumbling over the last few years. And I know there's been some articles written up about that. But in addition to Detroit, Lori or Sherry, do you have any other examples of foundations that are using their grant money in that way?
I think some of it depends on the. Okay, I think some of it depends on the nuance of what somebody would think is what government should be doing, replacing what they should be doing versus replacing what they actually have been doing and then haven't been able to. I don't know of examples of other folks. I will say in Healthy Places NC, we have been very involved with local governments, including the county manager, the county commissioners, and in many cases, and actually several counties, the recreation department or the planning department. And so we have made some grants and will continue to make some grants to some of those local governments to do things such as upgrade, expand, enhance publicly owned and publicly accessible community parks and recreation centers as a way to, and incorporating programming and encouraging and education around those and activity for various community residents. So we have participated in that, which is, connected to certainly the government's role in some cases really enhancing and enabling different rec departments with the city or county to come together with a plan to kind of spark new work and to capitalize it, work that would not, whether you think the government should be doing that or not, it would not be happening in those places and had not been happening in those places without our investments.
Is there anyone who's joined us on the webinar? Would you like to provide any additional answers to that question around foundations using grant funding to supplement failing city government functions? If so, you can just send us your name, or you can raise your hand and we will bring you into the conversation. Other than that, while we wait on those to come in, there's one more question I have from the audience members, and it's around measurement and it's around metrics again. And this question is around some of the specific metrics that, beyond the amount of dollars dispersed, that might be used to measure impact. And I don't know if you've given some thought to that, Lori or Sherry, if you've seen or heard of any other approaches when you think of metrics and success that you can use.
One of the pieces I mentioned that the folks from Duke are doing a social network analysis, so that's in process now, but one of the measures of success that we hope to see from that is increased relationships amongst folks in the community, relationships that they either didn't have before Healthy Places started, and or relationships that are more significant or at a deeper level of work, so they're not just that I know that person, but now I know that person, I'm in meetings with them, or now I know them, I'm meeting with them, and we're doing work together and sharing strategy ideas and wedding what pieces of what we're doing together in the community. So that's one way that we're measuring that. I know, we've put a lot of dollars and will continue to in the capacity building, and one of our partners is Center for Creative Leadership. And so they are measuring, differences and changes in people's awareness of their potential and their ability to do community-wide leadership, not just organizational leadership, if this is my role in my organization, but this is how I can play a role across boundaries in innovative ways in my community. So they are measuring those not only immediately after these intensive multi-day programs that happen over a span of a couple of months with coaching in between. We're also getting more of the qualitative pieces of grants are coming in now that our program officers can say, that person was at that Center for Creative Leadership training, connected with that person, and now they've changed the way this organization does that, and that allowed them to come in for that grant. So some of the pieces are the stories that we can tell that we know with a reasonable assurance that pieces are happening and connecting, building off of our capacity building or the other grants that we've made. So we're definitely looking at things more than just the dollars, because again, we could get the dollars out in ways that wouldn't take the resources that we're putting into it now.
And another thing I think that some of the people that we've talked to are trying to measure is more community engagement and a more, sorry, I can't think of the word right now, a more sort of mixed leadership within communities, and how other people at different levels are being involved in both informal and formal leadership within communities, and how you measure the level of activity and involvement of those groups based on some of the training and capacity building that the foundation has been doing, similar to what Laura talked about.
And I would also point people that there literally is a list now of what folks are measuring in place-based work that have been produced in the last several months and published by GEO, Grantmakers for Effective Organizations. It is a document that came out of a community of practice that we participated in over the last several years, which was around evaluation of place-based work. You know, even initially they were calling it evaluation of comprehensive community initiatives. But that piece is a kind of culmination of about 20 different funders getting together and dumping on the floor on index cards what they were measuring, and then grouping them together in ways where we could kind of see the similarities of different aspects of what folks are measuring and seeing as success in these place-based initiatives.
Thank you. I think we'll do our best to find that list and be sure to share that with everyone on the webinar as part of our follow-up email to you. Thank you both for answering that question. Back to the question we had around using grant money to fund and supplement a failing city's government function. I do want to share that we had another example come through the webinar from the Harris and Eliza Kentner Fund. They actually use a fund that supports a code enforcement officer for which the city doesn't have money to support. So and there's private funding to support a community swimming pool. Lots of infrastructure repairs from the hurricane that's happened there are being done with philanthropic dollars. Things around trees, historical treasure, etc., and that there are other foundations in the town that are also participating in many of these initiatives that would be considered for them city government projects. I also have another resource. Code for America is a Kaufman Foundation grantee that works with city governments to build open source technology and organize a network of people dedicated to making government services simple, effective, and easy to use. So this, too, is somewhat of ways in which foundations are supporting city and government officials through grant funding and work. So we have a link for that particular program that we're going to also share with everyone as part of the follow-up. So at this point, I just want to thank everyone. I hope you found this webinar to be really beneficial to you and that you will share a lot of what you've learned with your foundation colleagues. Before we sign off, I just want to make sure that you know at the end of this webinar, a brief evaluation will pop up automatically on your screen. We hope that you will take just a few minutes to complete the survey. Your feedback, as you know, is very, very important to us as it helps us determine future programming that we can provide to you that will be beneficial. In addition, as we've mentioned, a recording of this webinar will be made available shortly after this webinar on our council website. In addition, we will email to you copies of today's PowerPoint slides and a link to that recording, plus other resources that Sherry is going to share and that you have shared with us through this webinar. I just want to thank you very much for joining us today. I also would like to thank our partner in this series, again, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, for their collaboration. And I hope that you will join us at the upcoming fall conference where there'll be sessions dedicated to this topic in particular. And I also hope that you will save the date for the next webinar, which will be held in November on the National Standards Program. Registration for that webinar will be open sometime in early October, so please mark your calendar for that. I hope you've enjoyed your time. Thank you very much to Lori and to Sherry for spending your time with us today. And we look forward to hearing more from you as you learn more about your own work around place-based philanthropy. Thank you, everyone. We will be signing off.